Civilian casualties are reported as Turkey steps up its crackdown on Kurdish militants in the southeast of the country. With the Russian military targeting Islamic State's oil-smuggling business in Syria, meantime, the jihadists seek new ways to conduct their multi-million-dollar trade. And as Christmas festivities sweep the world, we look at how those in less fortunate circumstances are marking the day best they can, from families in war-torn Syria to refugees stuck at a massive camp in France. Hello, very good afternoon from me, Kevin Owen. Wherever you're watching around the world, just turned 5 p.m. here now in Moscow at RTHQ. If you're celebrating Christmas, have a good day from us. First then, Turkey's crackdown on Kurdish populations in the southeast of the country, ostensibly targeting militants, they say, shows no sign of letting up, seeing now a 12th successive day of violence and curfews. Ankara's so-called anti-terror operation extends across Turkey's southeastern regions and centres on Kurdish towns and villages. The government's mobilised 10,000 troops, supported by tanks and helicopters. The town of Cizre is one of the main focal points of the operation. We spoke to a Turkish journalist who's there and who asked not to be named. She described the situation on the ground.
16 people died. Every day they bombing the city with tanks. Many buildings burned, some schools. I think 3 or 4 schools they burned. Some of them, the army settled in the schools. Not just Cizre, many, especially the city which wants autonomy.
Ankara insists the crackdown's aimed only at militants from the banned Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, which it considers a terrorist organisation. However, more often than not, it seems, it's civilians that are falling victim to the artillery used by Ankara. Turkish media report 200,000 people have fled their homes during the crackdown. Locals in Cizre report that sometimes whole families are trapped inside buildings by the army.
They are shooting from there, from that hill, from there. We will not leave our people. We will resist until the last drop of our blood.
There are always bombs, mortar shells, guns and anti-aircraft missiles. They brought all the weapons in the world and they are hitting us. There are no houses, no windows are left. The children are afraid. They have gone crazy. The house there has been hit by a bomb and a rocket. There were 7 to 8 children in there, a family.
There's a curfew and we don't leave our houses. Then they bomb our houses. If we go out, there are snipers. This is genocide, nothing else. This government is not legitimate anymore. It can't treat its people with such cruelty.
No electricity, no water. It's difficult. We're suffering.
Despite the civilian suffering, Ankara says it will intensify its efforts against Kurdish militants.
The fight against the separatist terror organisation will continue until the end without hesitation.
Amid the ongoing crackdown on their towns, Kurdish fighters, along with Syrian opposition forces, are managing to drive back Islamic State in the north of Syria meantime. The YPG militias pushing towards a crucial dam now on the Euphrates River, and capturing this would clearly be a way forward for advancing deeper into ISIL-held territories. Danny Mackey from the UK's Syria Youth Movement believes Ankara's current clampdown on the Kurds is no coincidence.
Whilst the whole world is fighting a war on terror in Syria, including the Russians and the Americans to an extent, Erdogan is trying to fight the Kurdish groups. Interestingly, some of the Kurdish groups in Syria are actually allied to the United States of America, like the YPG. Erdogan has been bombing them and allowing the borders to be open for ISIS fighters and recruits to actually come in and bolster the ranks of these militants at the expense of some of these Kurdish groups. So it's a clear policy from Ankara to support the jihadist groups to the detriment extent of the Kurdish groups on the ground, who are among the only forces in Syria actually fighting these jihadist groups. Turkey is ultimately going against the coalition it's meant to be in, against these regional countries and states, and against the international community in continuing its let's just say, covert support for these jihadist movements.
Apart from ramping up its military campaign, the Turkish government's also expanding its list of political traitors, as they're being described now. The joint leader of a pro-Kurdish party has become the latest target for it.
A Turkish MP, co-leader of the People's Democratic Party, said in Moscow that Turkey's downing of the Russian jet was wrong. This is a total disgrace and treason.
The Kurdish politician isn't alone either in being branded a traitor by Ankara. Two journalists are to be tried for espionage for breaking a story about a Turkish truck allegedly carrying weapons and supplies to jihadists in Syria, while an opposition MP who brought up accusations of sarin smuggling has been charged with treason. David Morgan's a journalist and writer on Turkey. He says that the ongoing crisis in the country should get more attention from the international community.
At the moment, there's little publicity in the mainstream press. Turkey is seen as a victim of terrorism, as a victim of the current crisis in Syria. Kurds are branded as terrorists, unfortunately. There's a deceptive policy to refuse to talk about the Kurds in Turkey. And it's been like that for 30 years, actually, this propagandistic presentation. But we know the funding from ISIS and the support from ISIS comes through Turkey, or a lot of it.
Despite the Russian military's efforts to degrade Islamic State's oil smuggling activities, the multi-million-dollar illegal business is nonetheless booming, according to Russia's defense ministry. Here's our correspondent Medina Kochinova with more.
3 weeks after Russia's defense ministry presented detailed satellite evidence of ISIL oil smuggling operations into Turkey, it appears that it is still ongoing. Now, according to the recent report made by Russia's armed forces, heavy-duty trucks loaded with oil continue to cross the Turkish-Syrian border. And recently, Russian intelligence has spotted up to 12,000 trucks as well as tankers on the Turkish-Iraqi border. Now, since the start of Russia's air military campaign in Syria, the country's forces destroyed up to 2,000 tankers used to transport oil, as well as a number of oil production facilities. However, oil smuggling still continues, but now terrorists are changing their tactics, and the number of tankers using the so-called western route has significantly diminished. According to Russia's armed forces, the terrorists are now disguising their convoys. They're moving strictly at night, and they're changing their routes using a shortcut to Iraq. However, the final destination still remains to be Turkey. Now, for quite some time already, Russia's armed forces have been calling for broader cooperation with all sides involved in this fight against the spread of terrorism. And it was once again voiced this Friday that Russia is ready to join forces with the U.S.-led coalition in Syria, that it is ready to present the coalition with locations and other data on IS objects, and that Russian forces do expect the same response to come from the coalition. However, Washington for now says that it is not ready for such a move.